Hello and welcome to episode 6 of COP28 Covered, the daily podcast brought to you from the climate mega event that is COP28. It's the late afternoon of Monday the 4th of December. I'm Edie's publisher Luke Nichols. I'm joined once again by our deputy editor Sarah George.
Hello.
Matt Mace is sidelined once again, but he's on the mend, you'll be pleased to hear. And so Sarah and I are here once again to deliver up a packed show which plays into the day's official themes of finance, trade, gender equality and accountability. And in fact, for this podcast, we're going to be shining a light on the first of those sub-themes because we have a finance special episode to bring you featuring a trio of interviews with Lloyds Bank, Bankers for Net Zero and the Institutional Investors Group on climate change, plus a speedy roundup of all the big announcements from the day, along with a chat about the food we're about to eat here. All of that and more coming up in today's episode of COP28 Covered. Yes, welcome back to COP28 Covered, hosted in collaboration with the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions-led Race to Zero campaign. And we have once again escaped the confines of the air hangar atmosphere out in the media centre to be sat out here in my new favourite part of the expo. It's a vegan food park. Are you excited as I am, Sarah?
I actually am. So long-time Edie listeners will know that Luke has been vegan for... How long has it been now, Luke?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sarah. So we've made it 5 episodes without me mentioning it. This must have been about 18 months now. We're coming up on 2 years as we turn the year, yeah. But yeah, as you can imagine, the options are quite limited out here in the UAE.
Yeah, so essentially where our apartment is definitely like a party bit of the city. So expect things like loaded fries and late night kebabs and not much in the way of anything that's not smothered in cheese. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being at this food park as well. I might go for some vegan sushi.
Yeah, nice selection around us. What have we got? We've got Chuck Chick, we've got Wild on the Moon, Roots and Rolls, PXB, Prunch, all vegan variants, and basically loads of those kind of vans you get at like festivals, retro vans. There are some vegan variants around the expo. I think they pledged around a third of all the catering here to be plant-based. That really doesn't feel like that from personal experience over the last few days, and even if it is a third, I don't think that's enough for a climate summit. Anyway, I'm going to keep my rant about plant-based diets, or lack of, here for a future episode. There's a food-focused one coming up in a few days' time, so perhaps that one. But yes, let's move on with the show. Sarah, actually, would you like some good news to kick things off?
Always.
The podcast is now officially charting. We're number 67 in the world on iTunes for business podcasts and number 46 on Spotify. We've broken the top 50 and we're the only new podcast inside the entire top 50, so we're climbing up the ranks. Keen to see if we can break the top 20 by the end of this roller coaster. So Joe Rogan, we're coming for you. Please do share the podcast on your socials, tell your friends, and I thought I'd start by unashamedly inflating our egos there, Sarah. But more importantly, how are you? Usually after kind of 4 or 5 days of COP, people tend to either collapse or find their second wind. Where are you on that spectrum?
I mean, I did wake up this morning in a little bit of what I'd call COP delirium. I was a bit homesick, to be honest. I've been texted by my fiance who tells me that it's on the verge of sleep, telling me about his escapades with Christmas shopping and Christmas decorating. So I have decided to take it a little bit easier today in terms of not walking around so much in the heat, but instead meeting people in or near the media centre. So hopefully I'm recharged and raring to go explore the green zone tomorrow. How about you? How was your day?
Mine was all right. What did I do? I went and the funny thing about going around and speaking to people and seeing if you can get video interviews is you get a very high hit rate of people not agreeing to do video interviews. They're very cautious about it, but managed to get a couple in. Met some really interesting people over at a Bloomberg Business Summit outside of the COP walls, which was an interesting experience. Again, more on that to come later in this series. But yeah, lots going on, and actually I'm going to jump straight in and back to you, Sarah, for that kind of informative roundup segment for the day, because I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I actually have no idea what's been going on at COP at a broader level today. I think I said yesterday that events like this, you can either focus on the broader, bigger announcements here in the blue zone, or you can get stuck in the detail in some of those business discussions in the green zone, and I've very much been involved in the latter today. So, Sarah, you're on hand to round up what's been going on. Shall we stick with yesterday's new segment theme of what's hot at COP?
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, how about a kind of what's hot and what's not at COP, just to add a little variant. So the three biggest announcements or developments of the day, followed by one or two things that perhaps haven't been announced or have sparked some controversy or backlash. I think that works if you're up for it.
It does, although what's hot and what's not does sound like I should be working for Vogue instead. If you're looking for fashion, I'd say what's not here is heels, given the sheer amount of walking. See also flip-flops and various traditional wooden shoes.
Okay, well, I don't know if that is going to be your what's not, but let's hand over to you then for your what's hot and what's not at COP28.
I will be a little bit more substantial with my what's not, but let's go to the what's hot first. So today has been the finance-themed day, and the COP presidency has, like us, wasted no time in inflating its ego. It's confirmed that a total of $57 billion have been mobilised in the first 4 days, the majority of it coming from within the UAE itself actually, but also some significant pots around loss and damage and to the Global Climate Fund. Obviously we're waiting for more detail on exactly when and how that will be allocated, but for now the headline is indeed eye-catching. What's also hot is an update on that plan to treble renewables that was announced earlier this week. The Nature Conservancy and the Global Renewables Alliance have said that they'll work together to develop, establish and deliver a strategy for achieving that, while also delivering the aims of the Biodiversity Treaty, so essentially a nature-positive future that also runs more on renewables. So I'd say that that's extremely hot. Also staying on finance for number 3, a new task force has been launched on sustainability-linked sovereign finance for nature. So some of the places that need nature-related finance the most are those that are most in debt and therefore most likely to be offered loans instead of grants and loans with unfavourable payback terms. So here today, nations have outlined new guidelines on sustainability-linked sovereign financing that could be used to provide solutions for vulnerable countries that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, but also in debt. The first task force on this will be convened in January 2024, so check in on the new year for an update on that. And then in terms of what's not hot, the COP presidency team seem to be doing more U-turns than Rishi Sunak on net zero. So they were called out in quite a high-profile piece in The Guardian yesterday. Essentially, it had a video snippet of an online event in which the COP28 president, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, said that there was no science out there saying that a fossil fuel phase out would get us to 1.5. Obviously, the climate scientists, climate activists, feels like the whole world sort of piled in. He called an emergency press statement to say that he has great respect for his co-speakers on that event and has called the phase down and out of fossil fuels inevitable and essential. So I'd say what's not hot is the sheer level of confusion on this particular issue.
And those high heels.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you, Sarah. All of those announcements are once again covered in various forms on the ed.net website. Also, a shout out to our live blog, which is gaining some great traction on the site. I know Matt's been keeping that up to date from his sickbed, as has our reporter, Siddy, back home in the UK. Now let's crack on with the show then, because you've once again been our one-woman powerhouse and delivered up all of the interviews of the show, Sarah. Apparently we've got another trio of chats coming up for what is our finance special episode, or so I'm told by you. So what have we got?
It'd be funny if I gave you the wrong information, but I'm too nice for that. So first up, we've got a chat with Jonas Persson, who is the head of ESG finance at Lloyds Bank, a regular feature on this show back at home, given that Lloyds Bank are our usual podcast partner for our monthly show, Sustainability Uncovered. Another bit of shameless plugging there, but it was great to ask him. Essentially, those of us in the UK are probably most familiar with Lloyds through its high street branches, so what can they do at COP in Dubai is essentially what I asked them. Swiftly after that, I met with Heather Buchanan, co-founder of Bankers for Net Zero, to sort of take that conversation and zoom out a little bit, finding out how banks have been making good on top-line net zero finance emissions commitments that they made 2 COPs ago. And then last but by no means least, I catch up with Emily Morell, who leads on policy at the Institutional Investors Group on climate change. Essentially as well asking how COP outcomes really affect institutional investors on the ground, how that moves the millions and the trillions beyond what we've already seen. So that's my trio for you today, Luke.
Okay, right, so 3 great conversations to bring you. Let's play them back to back now. So first up, we'll go to Jonas Persson from Lloyds Bank, then we'll hear from Heather Buchanan from Bankers for Net Zero, and finally we'll hear from Emily Murrell from the Institutional Investors Group on climate change. Here are those 3 interviews in full.
So it's Finance Day here at COP28, along with a long list of other themes that the presidency agenda has selected. So in a hope of doing this topic justice, we're serving up a finance special, starting with a very familiar face to the ED podcast, Jonas Persson from Lloyds. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. A little bit flustered, a bit warm out there, but nice and air-cooled inside.
Yeah, this is the thing with the first meeting of the day. The sun is beating down upon us. And I think you told me that you haven't had the chance to explore the blue zone so much so far. So what have you been up to? How has your COP been so far?
Well, it's been very busy. I did arrive on a Friday night. We have hosted a few events ourselves, and I've been out and visiting external events as well. I do feel it is a journey of hope and despair, I would say. Very excited about lots of things, seeing people that are great ideas, great meetings, collaboration, great commitments, but the raw numbers from research are telling us a different story.
Yeah, I think I actually Instagrammed my train journey to COP26 with those exact words, hope and despair. But I think we should probably focus on hope for now. So I'd love to hear about your priorities here at this COP. So some people might be wondering, what is the role of a UK headquartered bank that's maybe best known for high street retail at a COP in Dubai?
Yeah, that is a great question. The reasons why we're here as the largest UK financial institution in the UK, we have a real role to play. So we are thinking about what matters to us, what was the materiality point for Lloyds Bank. Thinking about the built environment is a massive exposure for us, and we have 26 million customers in the UK. Other areas, of course, is agriculture for the bank as well. So we are trying to think about how we best collaborate with our 45,000 agriculture customers as well. What we do is about learning from other jurisdictions as well. So it's not only how we're working with our customers in the UK, policymakers in the UK, regulators in the UK, etc. But we are learning from others. We had a round table on Saturday morning with clients, academia, industry, etc. about how we decarbonize, or the lessons about how we decarbonize our built environment and our homes in the UK. So what we learned is by listening to others. We had representatives from the US, from Europe, where we have who's been experimenting or expanding on work streams or programs in the built environment. So we are keen to listen and take the best of that, of course.
Yeah, that's a theme here. I'm told that the people that made Dubai essentially took the best to keep the city moving, and that sounds like a really interesting event. Are you hosting or taking part in any other events?
I am. I will be here until Thursday morning. I think quite a big contingency of the UK is going back that day. Finance Day is very important to us. Energy Day is also very important to us as well. So trying to make sure we meet as many people as possible, learn as much as possible, and making plans and taking actions for the future.
Of course, and I think I'd be remiss not to touch on the Just Transition themed day as well. We've talked about having a finance themed day, which I think has been a regular fixture in the agenda, but the Just Transition theme is, I think, a bit newer. So I'd love to get your steer on why that's so important. Is just having the day enough? Would it maybe have been better to have all of this on the same day?
Yeah, what a great, I'm so glad you're raising this point as well. Think about it on our side, where we're looking at the built environment, our homes, or the agriculture. It's equally important to think about the just transition as it is on the climate side itself. We can't look at climate in isolation. We have to get our customers with us, who very often feels quite isolated from this topic. We have just released a report that I hope you can pick up. It's about how we learn about the decarbonizing our homes. The survey will tell us that those those individuals that have undertaken energy efficient measures are really happy with what they've done. 96% have said that they really are happy with the outcome. And more than 80% would recommend it to the neighbours, which is equally satisfying. And this is perhaps not surprising, because more than 70% of the population are saying that the outcome is meeting their expectations or even better than expectations. So really good. But of course, a home is not all about energy efficiency. It's about making sure it's warm, making sure you touch the population, the vulnerable homes that need help, because this have a real health implication as well. There are research telling us that £1 spent on warming vulnerable homes have a £4 impact from a health point of view as well. So it's really important to think about that.
I completely understand that, and the homes that need to spend that £1 to get that £4 might not even have it. They're too busy trying to choose between eat and heat.
It's so correct. We have undertaken other research ourselves, and we can say that 85% of the population has less than £5,000 of savings. So when we talk about material upgrades of homes, £5,000 is a very small amount. It's important that we are helping those customers more than anything else on a journey.
We've talked there about what the role is of banks in energy efficiency in terms of the just transition, but you've mentioned agriculture as well. So what's the role of banks like yourselves in facilitating the just transition there?
Yeah, I mean, equally in this space, there's perception that sort of farmers can undertake upgrades and understand what is required. It is an incredibly complex situation. We are working with the Soil Association, making sure we have methodologies to help our customers in this space to understand what the baseline is, what is the best intervention they can do in order to develop the farms. I think that's really bad. Can I do that again? Yeah.
Of course. So the question is, what's the role of banks like Lloyds in financing the just transition in agriculture?
So in agriculture, it's quite similar actually. We have about 45,000 customers in the UK agriculture space. They are struggling the same with everyone else with capital to do the right thing. It's a complex environment to decarbonize and support regenerative farming. So they need all the help they can get. Equally, they need to find alternative income streams. So it's not only about the offtake from their clients. It's not only about what support they get from the government, but if we can develop products on the carbon side, so they can monetize that from what they're producing, it's going to put them in a much better place.
Yeah, all super exciting stuff, and stuff that I'm sure that we'll touch on when we get to Food Day a little later this week. But Jonas, I'll let you get going now and see who else I can grab for a quick chat on this Finance Day special. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you so much. Lovely to see you.
Yes, so I'm passing the podcast relay back to myself to be speaking with Heather Buchanan, the co-founder of Bankers for Net Zero, an initiative who are friends of Edie's and who have space in the UK pavilion this COP. Thank you so much for your time, Heather. How is your COP going so far?
It's been fantastically busy, but really enjoying it so far.
Yeah, it's definitely been something of a whirlwind, but it also feels like it was just yesterday that it was COP26 and we just learned about the creation of Bankers for Net Zero. So it'd be great for those listening who aren't super aware of the initiative to get a brief introduction and an update on how the initiative's been growing.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And I mean, probably worth saying that Bankers for Net Zero originally started as a one-off initiative. We were going to last for a year in the lead up to COP26. Obviously, 1 year turned into 2 years because of COVID, and during that time I really worked quite heavily with the Cabinet Office and a large community of NGOs that were working in the kind of climate finance space. And fast forward 2 years when we had COP26, and I must emphasise how much of an accelerator COP26 ended up being for the finance industry in terms of the commitments that were made. So Bankers for Net Zero became the first kind of country chapter in the world for the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is convened by the UN. And we look very specifically at the commitments that banks have made and how that kind of plays out on the ground. So there's a great deal of work that goes on internationally in terms of standards. We look at the WE line that says that banks are committed to decarbonising their financed emissions, and we look at what those blockers are, what those enablers are, and in terms of policy and regulation in the UK.
Got it. And when you say banks, do you mean retail banks or multilateral development banks? What kind of organisations are we talking about? Can you give us a flavour of the membership?
Yeah, so certainly. So we've started with the retail banks. Having said that, we also have like British Business Bank, or good partners, the Welsh Development Bank, and we're increasingly getting kind of interest from the likes of the larger investment banks. So ultimately, it's any type of finance that needs to understand their financed emissions, which is everyone.
Yeah, of course. And I wanted to get your view on some of the big finance commitments we're already seeing here, and we're likely to see things like the Loss and Damage Fund. We hear a lot there from the big multilateral development banks, from governments themselves. Where do banks and retail banks fit into this global picture for anyone that's following from a distance?
Well, at the end of the day, banks, retail banks, we think they are the touch point of the financial world and the real economy. And so if you look at the commitments that banks have made and to decarbonise their finance emissions, it means they're on the hook for literally every product that they sell, every investment they make, every overdraft, every mortgage, every corporate loan, the corporate supply chain. So there's really no place that finance doesn't touch, as we know. And I think that to a certain extent, what's happening now is just a natural progression and acceleration of all the work and the commitments that started from COP26, because it's taken quite a bit of work just to get those actions to the point where they're getting implemented on the ground and working through the new metrics, and we'll just see that increase, and I think realistically amplify and accelerate over the coming years.
Yeah, at COP28 it was, as you say, that really big moment for the top line commitments. For us, at least, the next few years have been like, how on earth are you actually going to deliver that? So are we actually into this sort of nitty-gritty of implementation?
Yes, but I would say that definitely around the implementation, there's still a great deal of work going on, even just in terms of what measurement looks like. So up to now, all the commitments have been very top down. You've had the kind of big macro picture of measurement. Now we're getting under the skin of it. So what we're doing, Bankers to Net Zero with Project Perseus, getting automated, assurable scope 3 data from small businesses and whatnot. And that's something that up to now has just been estimates. And likewise, with the launch of TNFD, and that there is so much more talk about nature and kind of resilience planning and whatnot, there's fundamentally this shift of how do we actually measure that what we're doing is right, that it's got the right impact, how do we do that consistently to kind of de-risk it and understand it in a better way. And it sounds kind of desperately kind of unexciting, but a lot of those really important implementation bits get down to the fine detail around that.
I'm sure it's not boring for people who like to listen to this podcast. Something I did want to talk about in terms of implementation in the real world economy is, as you've touched on there, nature and agriculture. So I've had a look at Bankers for Net Zero's policy priorities for this summit, and one is incentivise investment to scale regenerative agriculture. And we saw quite a strong signal on that from the UAE presidency team on the 1st of December. So how hopeful are you? What did you make of those announcements, and what else can we expect on Regen Ag?
So I think, generally speaking, once you get the kind of that, I think that we've reached the kind of tipping point in terms of this being the next frontier, as it were. So I find just with after COP26, the big level commitments, it's people's minds start to focus on kind of how we move forward. Again, we're going to get back to kind of measurements and data and how we can understand risk. I mean, this is where development banks have a huge role to play in terms of creating blended finance, where the traditional finance sector might still be feeling its way to understand. So we think that development banks have a huge role to play in kind of helping shift capital in the right direction. But I'll give you my fun fact, and apologies if to anybody listening that's heard me say this before, but 1494 was the first book on modern accounting. And so we've had just over 500 years where we've had P&Ls and balance sheets where the real economy and the financial economy know how to speak to each other, but we've never had to measure nature or carbon or climate risk in that, and we're doing that over in a matter of years rather than the last half a millennium. And so the pace of change and the pace that we need to fundamentally change our risk and value models is quite extraordinary. And I think, we're with the focus and a lot of the kind of brightest minds on it, we can get there. But it's still we're still having to build the plane as we fly it.
That makes complete sense. I mean, you mentioned the importance of government finance there. The corporate finance is clearly already there when you see people like Mars, Danone already stumping up for regenerative ag. So do you have hope for private sector finance in this as well?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. At no point over the years in any conversations I've been in has anybody said there's not enough money to get this all sorted. But in order to get the money flowing, we need to have the right incentives, we need to have the right regulation, we need to have that continuity. And we've got an older system based on an older model that needs tweaking. And that's really where governments can come in and take slices of risk, even just the top slice of risk, change the regulatory requirements in such a way that money's incentivized to flow. Because right now there's still quite a few knots in the system that need kind of undoing.
I know that would be way too complicated to get into just on this podcast. I also know, Heather, that you have an event on the other side of Dubai today. So thank you so much for your time on the podcast and best of luck for your event later.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so for the next part of Finance Day, it's an absolute pleasure to be catching up with Emily from the Institutional Investors Group on climate change. So thank you so much for taking the time. How is your COP going so far?
Hi, it's great to be here. Yes, as always, COP is a climate city, I always call it, where there's lots of things going on. And of course, this year is a much bigger year in terms of scale than ever before, with around sort of 70,000 delegates. It's been a busy one so far, but there are some nice things coming out of the negotiations so far and some interesting announcements. And we've been hosting a number of events with our investor members on the ground here in Dubai. So it's been a good COP so far, but as always, a very busy one and much ahead over the coming weeks to get through to.
I can imagine, and I've gone straight into this because Edie and the IIGCC have met up a few times over the past years, especially since COP26. But for those listening who aren't aware of yourselves and your work, it'd be great to just get a brief recap and introduction.
Of course, so we are based in London, although we've got members from all over the world, which is fantastic, totaling about sort of 27 countries with about 400 members at the moment, and that represents $65 trillion of assets under management, so quite a sizable portion of investors, which is absolutely fantastic. And our aim as an organisation is to bring investors together towards a net zero and resilient future. So we work a lot with members across the world to make sure that we bring that to the fore of everything we're doing, including, of course, COP this week. And we've got sort of three programmes within that: corporate investor strategies and policy. I'm the director of the policy programme, so of course all of my work involves engaging with the EU, engaging with the UK government, engaging with the COP presidency and the FCCC, and we built a really great relationship with those stakeholders with very much the goal of saying investors want to put money into the right things. They want to help us transition towards a net zero future and keep that 1.5 degree goal within reach. But of course they need the right policy environment and the right political environment to make that a reality.
And I'd love to dive into what that environment might look like. I know that the group published an open letter to the COP28 presidency ahead of time, so it would be great to go over what the key asks in that letter are. What do you guys want to see from policy here?
Absolutely. So we wrote a letter to the COP presidency before the start of this summit, and we outlined a number of things that we'd really like to see. One of those is around stronger language and commitments around the phasing down of fossil fuels. So there's been a lot of debate around phase out versus phase down, and of course there's lots of controversy at this particular COP around what that language might look like. But actually what we really need to see now is progress on that. So we've been advocating for more on energy efficiency, more on renewable energy, and of course stronger language around fossil fuel phase out, so we can keep that 1.5 degree target within reach. So that's been a big focus for us. We also made asks to the presidency around adaptation and resilience, something our members care a great deal about, and today you can see our call to action around that as well. We bring together the public sector, the private sector, to really look at mobilising finance towards the things that matter, and that's really important to us too. And then, of course, overall scaling up climate finance. So we know that we need private finance to make the goals a reality and to keep the Paris Agreement within reach. We know that public finance in itself is not sufficient. So investors want to play a role in that. So for us, scaling up finance and ensuring the right quality and quantity of finance is a really big goal for us as well.
I can imagine. So a weighty to-do list there, but I do want to just zoom in on the net zero aspect, because as I mentioned, COP26 was a real moment for investors setting their first net zero strategies, but at those times it was mainly a signal of things to come, a statement of intent, rather than actually how we're going to deliver on the ground. So I would love to get an update on how that's going and how the outcome here could affect how that work and discussion carries on.
No, you're absolutely right. So I joined the COP world, if you like, as a climate negotiator for the UK government before the Paris Agreement was ratified and agreed. And back then the private sector was not really involved in the climate negotiations and involved in the COP process. It's fantastic to see that since then, including COP26 in Glasgow, as you mentioned, there's been a much stronger presence from the private sector and a much stronger presence from investors, which is fantastic. And I think what we really want to see is looking to the COP for that global ambition level, that trajectory between now and our targets. We've got great sort of milestones along the way, 2030, 2040, 2050. But actually for investors, it's really important to see how fast are we actually going, what direction of travel are we going in, and are we on this kind of consistent and clear pathway towards our well below 1.5 degree target. So I think for investors and for us at IGCC, making sure those targets are kept within reach and the right political signals here is really, really important. I mean, there's several different parts of COP. We talked earlier about the massive scale of it briefly. But of course there are heads of state here and some really important decision makers, financial players, multilateral development banks, etc. And because those leaders are here on the ground, I think it's really, really important that they do remind the private sector that actually they are committed to this. And I think the problem has been from this COP and from previous COPs, the mixed signals that those people are getting. So on the one hand, we are talking about reducing methane emissions, energy efficiency and renewables. On the other hand, we're talking about fossil fuels and sort of not necessarily being as ambitious in some areas. So I think for me, this COP, I'm really hoping that we continue to see progress on that. And also around, I think, the adaptation and resilience piece, where we would really like to see more progress, and that a lot of that I think will come out of the global stocktake and the messages from that we are not on track and we do need to see more ambition.
Yeah, it's good that you say about the world leaders giving the signal to businesses, because what we see as well is businesses giving the signal to them, like you have permission to be bolder. So is this a two-way conversation?
Absolutely. Well, it should be, right? I mean, one of the things that we advocate for at IGCC is involving investors in that conversation, because actually they do have the experience, the practical experience to say, look, we've done this, but we could do more with the right enabling environment. I think what I've found very positive over the years is seeing that kind of integration between the public sector and the private sector, that COP is not just now about the negotiations, there's also a whole strand of COP that, as you say, is about that communication between those doing the projects, those looking to push for more ambition, and those that are making decisions in a kind of policy or international political environment. So I think that's something which is really, really positive. And I think to your wonderful example, that there are two-way dialogues happening, which is great. I've seen that a lot, for example, around electric vehicles. You see car manufacturers saying, actually we want to have stricter targets on phasing out polluting vehicles. That helps us to invest in the right charging infrastructure, new models of electric vehicle to sort out the kind of grid issues that we're facing. So that's just one example of many, but that is where the private sector is really saying, this is what we need and this is what we want. And sometimes actually they've been pushing for greater ambition than we're currently seeing from decision makers and policymakers. So actually it's a very interesting change in tone, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, we do get people asking who's really in charge here, who's really leading the charge. So some great food for thought to bring our discussion to a close. I know it's Finance Day. I'm sure you have 1,000,001 things to do. But thank you so much for taking the time to come on the pod today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much to Jonas and to Heather and to Emily. 3 great chats there for our finance special episode of COP28 covered. Now, I'm very aware that we therefore haven't touched on the other great themes of the day at COP, which are trade, gender equality and accountability. But that's where the rest of ED comes into play, because we've got a huge array of other COP-themed content and interviews on the site right now, much of which has focused on those other crucial themes, including a really interesting chat I had on video with Stephanie Nkrumah, who is a climate activist and the director of the Centre for Green Growth based out in Ghana. And that was all about gender equality and that aspect of this COP, and given some of the shocking stats that still exist around gender equality, or the lack of it when it comes to leadership on climate action, I thoroughly recommend taking a watch of that on the site. So just visit ed.net for that video with Stephanie, along with all of our other COP content live on the site right now. Now, Sarah, the night is fast drawing in here and I'm concerned that these food trucks are going to close. So I'm going to propose that we do another rollover of the listener quiz. I can see you hanging your head there, Sarah. People have emailed into our podcast, but I simply haven't had a chance to go through them all. There we go. I thought I'd be honest at least. Anyway, there was one email though that I'll give a shout out to very briefly, which I saw come in. You might have seen this one. It came in from Zolkanan Malami. Anyway, I won't read the email out in full, but he said he was coming out to COP later in the week. He's been listening all week and is a new fan of ours. Sarah, you'll be pleased to hear. He's even excited to try and meet you. So we actually have fans. So thanks, Zolkanan. Yes, you can come and meet us. Drop us another note on the email address if you want to have a chat with me or Sarah when you get here. Otherwise, just look for the woman in the pink power suit chasing people with a podcast recorder. That's Sarah, by the way. Anyway, do reach out to us, anyone, if you'd like to meet up or have a suggestion for a future episode, or just want to say hi. We're on podcast at fav-house.com. So that's a wrap for today. Hopefully Matt will be well enough to join us here tomorrow. Sarah, reminder of the themes tomorrow?
Yeah, so tomorrow the themes are multiple again: energy, the just transition and Indigenous people. So for our podcast tomorrow, I hope to bring you some interviews about the energy transition and what that looks like in different parts of the world, looking at the context-specific consideration for that trebling of renewables goal. And hopefully we can also have some time to recap on the accountability theme from today as well, because I'm aware that's something we've glossed over, but that our regular readers are always keen to listen to and read about.
Yeah, so it's almost going to be another special potentially, isn't it? The energy theme is a real big one here at COP, so lots of content coming up for that. Lots to look forward to. We're going to go and have our pick of the bunch of meat-free meals. Sarah, have you got your eye on any?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the sushi. With it being so hot out here, I think that having something like spicy fried chicken might just finish me off.
I'm going to go for a spicy fried vegan chicken then. We'll try and get a picture of whatever we choose up into the podcast episode. We'll be back for the next episode tomorrow, 5th of December. Until next time, it's a goodbye from Sarah.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.